Welcome to creating the targets using new method from library, and I'll show you the new screening workflow tools in the All Alliance work. Right, let's take a look at setting up the targets in target suspect screening. So we're going to do them in phases. First, we're going to set up the targets using the new method from the library, and then we'll adjust the criteria for the targets in the method editor using a workflow for setting up screening. Very similar workflow for setting up the suspects. Let's do the targets first. Okay, I'm going to start the TOF flavor here. And note that we're doing all lines in the TOF flavor. If we're going to do QRay, we need to use the QTOF. So I'm going to start a new batch. And I'm going to go to this directory. And I'm going to load these samples. I'm going to call it target suspect screening, create the batch, and then I'm going to add these samples in. Now what we're going to do next, added the levels here to the calibration samples, but what I want to show you is the new way of setting up the method from the library from LC. Now it's here or it's in the method menu under new. You can access it either location. I'm going to go from the new method here from the tools menu, and you see I've got to choose a library. So I'm going to choose the library for the targets. See, I've got a library for the targets and a library for the suspects. So I pick the target library, and as I said, I'm going to do all ions in this workflow. Now here you have a choice. You could use a sample to determine retention times, for example. That's required in the QRay workflow because you need the bands from the acquisition method. In this workflow with all ions, I'm going to trust the PCDL library, which has the compounds I'm looking for, and I'm going to use the retention time from that library, not from the sample. So there's choices there. You can also pick up a subset of the compounds by creating a compound list, which you could browse for, and that would be in the form of a CSV text type file, having the compound name or the CSV number. But I'm going to take all the compounds in the library and use them all. Next, I have the choice of qualifiers. I'm going to pick 5 qualifiers, attempt to create 5 qualifiers, and I'm going to go for the weighted, which gives more importance to the higher masses. And from a species point of view, I am going to pick the N+H ion. If you have an ammoniated buffer solution, you could pick more. They do create more candidates that you would have to review. So here I'm going to add those compounds to the method from this library. And here we see what we've got. We've got compounds in this list. And you can see they have masses, and if I go to the qualifiers, you can see that the qualifiers have been added in. All right, let's start with the qualifiers because there's a lot of detail here. You can see that the tool has added not just masses for qualifiers, but also collision energies. It's picked that up from the PCDL library, and I'm showing the collision energy and the collision energy delta columns here. So that is the magic of this tool. It does a lot of bookkeeping for you. It brings in the retention time from the PCDL library so that I can find these targets. Probably, of course, and I'll show you later how to come back and adjust these things. If I go to the compound setup, I've added the species column, and I've gone through and marked these all with targets so that I can separate them later with using this user-defined column. Now, last, I'm going to go quickly through the calibration curve. I'm going to create levels from the calibration curve. Here they are. Those are from the cal samples in the batch. And if I look at the curve fit, I've done linear include and 1/x, and I've applied those to all to build up my calibration curve for these targets. Now that we're in the method editor, let's use the workflow tool, Screening LC. Now this is used to set the criteria. It's very flexible because I can apply it to all compounds, or I can select compounds and then come in and only adjust that compound or set of compounds and their criteria. Very important with that flexibility. So the first thing I want to do is create a pattern library. Now the pattern library is a synthetic creation using the molecular ion cluster and any adducts that are identified. So in this case, I've identified M plus H, and I can create that library from all the entries that are present. And it will fill that out for me and adjust that in the method. Here it's building up these entries in the library editor. You can, of course, manually edit them in the library editor itself. So once we're finished with that, we can go to the other criteria. So mass extraction setup. What I'm going to do is give it a 10 ppm window. With the retention time setup, I'm going to, for the targets, I'm going to give it half a minute window, which is generous. And for the outlier setup, these are criteria used to distinguish those that meet all the criteria. For retention time, I'm going to give it a 0.2 minute window, which is what's coming from the Sante regulations. Minimum signal to noise is 3. Coelution score, I want a good correspondence between the targets and qualifiers in terms of the shape and how they come out together. Mass accuracy limit, I'm going to set to 5 ppm out of the Sante regulations. Mass match score, I want a good score there of 70. And the number of verified ions, I'm just going to stick with a 2 as the Sante regulations expect. So if I go with that, it quickly sets all of that up in the criteria, which I would have to go to the outlier section and set up individually, all presented to you in one screen here in the screening UI. Last, let's double check. We've got our reference pattern library as discussed from the criteria. And also, I want to make sure that I've checked SureMass because I want this fast. All right, after we've analyzed, let's take a look at this high fortified sample here. And we're in batch at a glance, of course, with the calibration curve. Let's take a look at that through the screening UI. And if I look at the screening UI, first notice that there are only targets. There are not suspects added yet, but I can see that I've got 9 hits, 1 maybe, and a lot that aren't showing up in the spike sample. And if I look at any particular one, we've talked about malathion. It has, as pointed out, 4 ions that are verified, good mass accuracy, good match score, and a lot of things are fitting here with the identification and confirmation of malathion being present as a target. So now that we've seen how targets work with their calibration curves, let's move on to talk about suspects. Thanks for your attention.